We are back here for another week on the Limitless Leadership Lounge. I'm John Gehring, your host. As always, joined by Coach Jim Johnson here on this spring day in Rochester, New York, where we're based out of. But wherever you're listening to from, we appreciate you. And if you've gotten some value from our conversations with leaders, we'd love if you leave us a review up on your favorite podcasting platform and tell us more what you think. Leave us some feedback and help others find the show as well. So today, Coach and I are joined by Jake Stahl for a second time. He joins a few illustrious guests who have been on the lounge here twice. And Jake, we've talked with before about neurostrategy and business development, and that's what we're going to talk about again. Jake has spoken in a whole slew of different countries and states as he has continued sharing his message of business development with others. And it's a slightly different message than you normally hear, but a successful one indeed. And we'll dive into that coming up in a bit. He's also founded a new company called Orchestraight, which we'll talk about too. And he is a business consultant and a great coach and a future author as well. So, Jake, without any further ado, welcome to the Limitless Leadership Lounge, and thanks for being here with us today.
Well, thanks, John and Coach. I appreciate it. It's great having me back. Thank you so much for that honor.
Well, it's kind of cool because the last time we talked with you, you gave young leaders a lot of insight into sales, business development, and what you call neuro strategy. But now you've kind of taken it a step further. So it's worth an update because you have this new product and company that you've rolled out. And I know you've also started a podcast and are in the process of writing a book too. But first, let's back all the way up to a term that you say you coined, and it's an interesting term and has a lot of great benefits for our young leaders who are listening. So let's talk about neurostrategy. What is it, and
Sure.
how can it help someone, especially when they're building their business?
Well, I want to clarify, I coined it with the definition that it has. So I'm sure the term's been used somewhere, but um, Orcas, neurostrategy is the combination of behavioral and decision-making psychology, social psychology, which is kind of the use of magic words and phrases, and neurolinguistic programming, and pulling that all together into a strategy to build your business. So your value proposition has the most impactful wording. So anytime you talk on the phone, it's super impactful. Anytime you do an email, it's impactful. So it's not just a generic outreach. It's very, very intentional, not only to the word, but even the sentence structure is done very intentionally.
Interesting. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more and dive in. Let's define some of these terms too. You mentioned neuro-linguistic programming, right? Or NLP. What is that? And how can that also be something that we can be more mindful of in our daily lives?
Yeah, NLP was developed give or take 50 some years ago, and it was designed coach for getting athletes to do peak performance. But it's a philosophy basically, it's a pseudoscience. So let's not confuse it. It's pseudoscience that says we all act, talk, think pretty much the same way. So when we talk and our eyes go in one direction, we're recalling memories. If it goes in another direction, it may be that we're making things up or thinking about what that would look like in the future. Explores modalities. Do we talk in terms of seeing, hearing, thinking, touching, tasting, smelling? And the whole idea behind neurolinguistic programming is to change the way we think about things, but also recognize how others are thinking about things. Super valuable. And by far, our biggest advocate is Tony Robbins, the motivational speaker.
Yeah, with your neuro strategy, can you take us a story with what you're doing with this with a client? Obviously you don't have to name the client, but just give us a little bit of description of how a leader can use the some of the techniques you teach people.
Yeah, sure. I work mostly with the forward-facing people, the front-facing that deals with the customer. I always tell a client when I go to work with them that when they dial, from the time they dial the phone to the time they hang it up is my domain. That's where I live. Anything outside of that is not me. So I'll give you an example, coach. There's a lot of people that are developing email strategies and email chains in ChatGPT, and they're just sending out a selling message. Hey, coach, buy from me. You should just buy from me. So when I had that customer put their email chain through Orchestrate, it increased their click rate by 15%, which is almost unheard of. But it's because the subject line was so impactful, and then the body of the email was persuasive and made the person want to take action.
Mm.
And Coach and John, I don't know about you, but I get 100 DMs a day, and none of them persuade me to take action. They persuade me to delete, but that's about it.
Well, you got to give us one teaser, just one or two examples of something that people have been enticed with that message.
Yeah, so when it comes to the neuro strategy, the whole idea is to make them want to take action. So an example, coach, would be something called future pacing. And what that means is I get you to picture what it'll be like after you've put my solution in place.
Mm,
So if I teach you A, I'm going to say, Coach, so in 6 months after you started A, you're going to see a 20% increase because you did A.
okay.
And I may even put in there the fear of loss, which is a bias, and say to them, if you don't put this into place, think about where you'll be. So you have a choice of where your mind puts you versus being 20% ahead of the game. And those are just two small techniques used with neurostrategy.
Mm. So you're talking about persuasive language, and this is what all the neurolinguistic programming is, right? And the
Yep.
power of persuasive language. And you're also saying that because of the way you talk to people, they can react much differently and potentially in the way that that you want them to. So what would you say to somebody who's maybe just writing emails off of the top of their head and not really using any of these strategies because they don't realize the power of language?
The one thing I would say to those people is read your own emails or DMs from a consumer perspective. Would you buy from that message? One of my biggest selling points with a company is not me selling them. I'll tell the CEO of a company, do me a favor, call your company, pretend you want to buy, and let your salespeople hit you without knowing who you are. 80% of the CEOs come back to me and go, oh, yeah, I see what you mean. I would not buy from that either. So, a lot of times, neurostrategy sells itself. All you need to do is look at it from the other side and see that what you're doing just isn't working.
Well, Jake, I got to take back, because when I look at some of your profile, I know you were trained some with Ken Blanchard.
Yes.
And he's one of the elder statesmen in leadership and one of the
Yes.
gurus. I had the pleasure to meet Ken once at an event, and
Oh,
really I've
cool.
read a few of his books, and a pretty neat guy. And certainly we talked before we went on air that we're amazed on people how many books they could write. And Ken has written a bunch of them, but the interesting thing with Ken is he's done them mostly with someone else,
Yeah.
which is kind of unique. But I'm curious, can you share one or two things that you really learned about leadership from the Ken Blanchard training?
Yeah, so he was kind of the king of situational leadership, right? So you have your four quadrants, you have the bell curve, and really that's neurostrategy, right? Because you're taking into effect where a person is in their job and you're coaching to that specific point. The big mistake we make as coaches is we coach everybody exactly the same and we don't take time to get that baseline. And the great thing about Ken is he emphasized understanding the baseline before you endeavor to coach. And neurostrategy is really no different. Coach and John, when I talk to you, I could talk to you the same way, but because of your background, your biases, your history, everything you've learned so far, you could take the message two different ways. So I have to be really careful with my messaging. And the problem nowadays is so many people are sending out mass marketing and they're sending out the exact same message to everybody. Here's what's never clicked with me: you send it out to 1,000 people, hoping you'll get five responses. Has anybody thought about the fact that that email only appealed to five people? And the other 995, it wasn't towards their learning style or to their history. So why aren't we slowing down our reach out, making it more intentional and more focused? What does it matter whether you spend an hour sending out emails or an hour getting to know two people and being able to close them, right?
Yeah,
So
very
yeah, so sales is more not so much the quantity, but it's the quality of the conversation. But this is oftentimes counter to what we hear from some of the big sales gurus in our world. So how can we reconcile that difference where some of these successful salespeople are telling us that it is all about quantity, but yet there's also certainly a quality element of it too? Is it a matter of striking the right balance?
Yeah, and I don't want to take anything away from super successful salespeople that have used this effectively. What it may be is that their message was stunning and it went out to a very targeted group. So I don't want to say that mass marketing or using the same message doesn't work. What I'm saying is that when you send out a message, make it to the audience that's going to receive it the best. And the mistake we make nowadays is we say, I'm going to look for CEOs of companies under 10 people that only been around for a year. And that's my ideal customer profile. It's not. Your ideal customer profile needs to be deeper than that. And you're not going to get that from something like Apollo or Sales Navigator because that doesn't tell you enough about their personality. The great thing about neurostrategy and what I built into Orchestraight was you do analyze their personality and you do a follow up specific to that. And you use verbiage they're familiar with to make maximum impact.
That's good. Well, Jake,
If,
I know you've just started, so tell us about your new podcast and what, people can expect to learn from it.
yeah, thanks, coach. I'll tell you, the podcast came out of frustration. I've trained over 6 countries, 47 states, and the same thing I hear over and over again is use a sales script and throw it out to a million people and just hope that via a math game, I'm going to get 10. So the new podcast is Lead Gen Reboot, where I talk about how to just stop doing that. Take the time, do it right. I bring on guests. Had some pretty cool guests on so far that talk about their experiences with lead gen and how intentional they are. But coach, if I'm being perfectly honest, the biggest thing that got me to the podcast was math. People take a CRM and they look at the data and they say, last year we reached out to 10,000 people and we closed 1,000. So we're closing 10%. So this year, we're going to make a bunch of phone calls and I'm going to count on closing 10%. And the part that frustrates me is why would you take last year's failure at giving a good sales message and make that this year's goal? I've made it the goal to continue giving a crappy message, but playing the law of averages and still closing 10 people. I just don't get it. I'd rather have 5 people intently focused on 20 customers and get them to sell them that way versus winging it and hoping for the best.
So your message matters, is what you're saying. And that message is something that you've helped your clients develop over the years. Tell us a story, maybe a client that you worked with whose message was that message that, as you said, it was crappy. It just wasn't good, right? It wasn't producing the results. And they could have kept
Yeah.
that message and just increased the numbers of people they reached out to, or through your guidance, they actually improved their message and then therefore improved their close rate. What did you walk that client through and how did it work out for them?
Sure. So, in order to tell that story, let me take a step back. People think of business development as something where it's all about reach out and it's all about what you say. But to me, business development is about 3 things: it's about perception, it's about conditioning, and it's about coding. So, how do we perceive the customer and how do they perceive us? How are they conditioned to response? And how are they coded to response? In other words, what does their past history tell them to do in this situation? So I worked with a startup and I took away their sales scripts. said, don't do that anymore. We're going to talk about perception. We're going to talk about why people are conditioned to respond the way they do. And then we're going to talk about how to work with their base coding so that every phone call you make, you adapt on the fly. It's not about thinking about what am I supposed to say next? What line am I on in my sales script? It's about actually understanding. And just as a quick exercise to talk about conditioning, if I say to either one of you, hey, how are you today? What's your response?
Awesome.
Doing
Yeah,
well. How are you,
yeah,
Jake?
yeah, exactly. So it's fine, thanks. How are you? I'm awesome. How are you? If a loved one says to you, I love you, what's your conditioned response?
I love you.
I love you too, right? And even when we go into a retail store, the clerk comes up and says, can I help you? And we say, no, thanks, just looking. So we're conditioned to say things. Sales and even talking to your spouse is no different. And here's the trick that I think a lot of people miss. If I give you one condition response, other condition responses line up in my head. So a salesperson calls, they says, hi, how are you? I say, good, thanks, how are you? Now their condition responses are lining up in their head. I've already got one. That costs too much. Maybe next quarter I have to ask my partner. They all line up waiting for a chance to get out of the mouth. So, as salespeople and as humans with our friends and family, how do we break that conditioning? And that's what I teach.
Very good. Well, Jake, one things I always kid people, I was from the education sector and, you hear about the 3 R's, but I kid people that effective leaders, the 3 R's is relationships, relationships, relationships. And I know that's something that I think you're weaving through
Right.
very powerfully is so if you were working with a young leader, because we always, you hear things like, I'm for my people first, but then their actions don't align with that very well.
Yeah.
So, what advice would you give a leader and trying to be more effective in building relationships with their team members so they're all on the same page?
I think one of them is spend some time with them. Take them to lunch, sit with them, ask them what motivates them. Because, coach, as you know, as a motivator yourself, different motivations for different people, right? One
Yeah.
person just wants to be the best. Another person just wants to be better than yesterday. Another person wants to make $1 million. All those motivations are different. But as a leader, if I just think money motivates everybody, I'm going to be missing it with at least a couple of people. So the biggest thing to me is when you're leading a team, get to know your people. Spend a half hour just shooting the breeze and just get to know each other. It's amazing how many walls that breaks down.
How about as a leader too of maybe a team of salespeople, right? And traditionally you have all these goals to try and meet, and they're usually results-based goals where we're
Yeah.
looking at, you know, end of year profit or whatever, which is so important, right? Because that's what keeps the lights on, so to speak. But how do we start to break that as well and break some of the culture as leaders in high pressure driven sales companies? Where we're not so much talking about the profit result, but we're talking more as well about the process.
Yeah, and John, to that, I don't know if you're ever going to avoid the profit result conversation. The company has metrics they're going to hit. I mean, I just read that Disney raised their prices again, and now they're seeing decreasing attendance. Price is one of those things that you can't get away from. But one of the things I've found when I've been coaching sales teams is if I get them involved in the conversation, I ask for their feedback. I get what they think is realistic and what their stretch goals would be. If I can work with them to meld their needs in with the company's needs because they feel involved, they're more likely to follow through. And that's basic human psychology, right? Nobody's going to give you a suggestion and say, I think this is a good idea. And then when you implement it, they're going to go, I'm not doing that. So, a big thing with sales teams is they're very opinionated, they're very strong willed. So, let them be part of the process. What's realistic for you? Okay, can you do 15% above that? Try to find that spot where everybody's just going like this. And it's amazing improvements it can make. That startup I was working with, we 3x their sales in about 9 months just by doing the neurostrategy and getting them involved. Everybody has an opinion, so why not at least listen to them? Because there may be a pearl there.
Great point. Well, Jake, I know you're also in the process of something that I know a little bit about, and I know how challenging it is. You're working on a book.
I
Can you tell
am.
us a little bit about that project?
Yeah, I'm writing a book on neurostrategy. The hardest part about this is trying to justify the term, right? You never, well, I shouldn't say you never. I mean, Brian Tracy talked about the psychology of selling, but very few people talk about the psychology behind dealing with another person. So the neurostrategy is why should we? How can we? When do we? And it puts it into a form that everybody's going to understand. The great thing about neurostrategy is you can practice it all the time. You can practice it with your spouse, your kids, your parents, your friends. You can always be honing the ability to do it. So if you're practicing 24/7 and you're doing the right things, you can't help but get better. And that translates into better relationships with everybody.
It's all about, that's the word that keeps coming up, is those relationships. So you're writing a book, you're doing a podcast. I know you also have a new company too, and that's a really cool
Yep.
new tool. Tell us a little bit about this tool and how, maybe you tell a story about a business owner who this tool has helped improve their business, just simply by using it.
Sure. So my new product and company is called Orchestraight, but it's not spelled normally. The straight at the end is Straight because it's the straightest path to success. But the company came about because I'm heavily embedded in the fractional executive community and I do talks for them each year and I'm always helping fractionals and I coach fractionals. But the biggest two things I've always heard was, all right, Jake, I was kicked out of corporate America or I left it. I formed my LLC. Now what do I do? Or somebody said, hey, listen, I've been a chief marketing officer for years. People had to listen to me. Now they don't. And I am not good at selling myself. What do I do? So Orchestrate was designed to take you from the ground up. It helps you build your value proposition, your elevator pitches, your ideal customer profile, your offering, and then it puts that to work. So if I'm approaching ABC company, I can say, take the value proposition we just created, put it up against abc.com, tell me the executives I should talk to there that are recruiting or that make the buying decisions. I can ask Orchestrate to do all that research and then ask it to create an email campaign that will be able to go out to them. But here's the kicker. Because Orchestrate looks at each person's individual profile, the email campaign is dedicated and intentional towards that person. And it uses behavioral decision making, social psychology, and neurolinguistic programming to create the perfect email. So it is all about being intentional, being specific, and helping build a relationship. Because one thing I espouse is when you're in contact with somebody for the first time, don't ever talk about yourself or your company or your product for the first 3 to 5 minutes. Just ask about them. At that point, the law of reciprocity kicks in and they want to hear about you and they're going to be the most receptive. So Orchestrate is built around that premise. How to be a go-giver, how to be intentional, how to build a relationship, and then how to sell.
I'm right with you, asking questions first. Can you help our audience and with maybe a couple questions beyond the famous "How are you?" The and getting a little bit deeper with a person, but not so deep because you're just meeting someone. You're not going to ask them their most tragic story probably in the first 30 seconds. But can you give us a few examples of some questions that you found had been effective in starting to build that relationship process, I guess?
Yeah, sure. And it's funny, coach, because whenever I give a talk, my challenge at the end of the talk is don't ever say how are you ever again.
Oh, good.
Just don't do it. But one of my favorite questions to ask is, John, I've read your LinkedIn profile. Tell me what LinkedIn doesn't tell me.
Oh, I like
And
it.
it's funny because everybody starts off with, that's a good question. And then they really think and they get involved in it. And the reason I never structure my second question is it's always going to be around what their answer is.
Hmm.
So if John, you say, hey, listen, I do card magic and I don't put that in my LinkedIn profile. I might ask you, hey, where'd you learn that from? And can you show me something on Zoom? So my first question's intentional. The rest of them are just built on your answer.
Mhm. That's
And I
great.
espouse this with people in their elevator pitch. Don't ever give your elevator pitch first. Give your elevator pitch as a response to a problem they've given you.
Right.
And I just think pitching first is the wrong approach. So that's it, coach. It's one question, and then I evolve from there.
I love it. Thank you.
That's really interesting. So you're saying to not plan out conversations, and that's another thing that you talked about throwing away the sales scripts at that
Yeah.
particular company, and we get these sequenced emails all the time. But then you also did mention that Orchestrate, your tool, does help you write those things. So
Yep.
where do you think the balance is between planning out a process to try and build a relationship versus also being flexible to responding to where that relationship just naturally goes?
It's funny you ask that, John, because I think this is a message to people who use mass marketing and AI is it may help you in the beginning, but eventually you've got to talk to somebody. It's going to happen whether you like it or not. So you better be good at it. I think the balance occurs after the initial reach outs. I've had some guests on the show say they do an automated connection request on LinkedIn and then they ask them about their business. And after that, it's let's connect. So the initial reach out, why not use automation? But don't make it a selling pitch.
Mm,
Hey, I want to connect. I get so tired of these that say, "Hey, I looked on your website and what you do is amazing." Please don't do that. I hate that. And I saw one that said, "Hey, I saw you were on a podcast, and I particularly like this sentence you used." So I always write back to him and say, "So what else in the podcast did you like? Did you like the thing I finished with?" And I never get a response back. So, John, I think there's that fine balance between what can be automated without being impersonal and then genuinely connecting with somebody.
mm,
And one of my favorite neurostrategic questions is, does it make sense to connect live? I give them the choice. They have the feeling of freedom of control. They can say no, and that's okay. But when I involve them in the decision making, I would say 85% of people I say that to will connect with me live.
mm.
I
That's
love
It's not a
another
bad
key.
batting average.
Yeah,
it.
not at all.
Hey, Jake, I got to ask you, digging and doing some research on your LinkedIn and also your website. I like this question. It said, what does selling without selling mean to you?
Selling without selling is when you never really have to make a pitch, especially in the first 5 to 10 minutes. Coach, there's something that profilers call it and FBI profilers call it. They call it eliciting information. So I may start off with, hey, coach, I hear your problem. Would you be open to trying X? Does it make sense to try X? Because what I'm getting you to do then is I'm getting you to think it through and you start to sell yourself. I don't need to do anything. So, would you be open to, would it make sense to do this? Another way, coach, is to give people an out. One of the things you're taught in negotiation is give people a back door. Take away the no right away because most people go into a negotiation with, how do I say no? How do I get out of this? And that's all they're thinking about. So a great technique, coach, is when you start a conversation is listen, feel free to say no. And as soon as you do that, a weird psychological trigger happens. The person relaxes, they take a step back, and they're more open to listening to what you have to say because they know it's not going to be a hard press. They can feel free to say no.
Mhm.
Mm,
So, selling without selling coach is using verbiage and language and techniques that allow the person to be involved in the decision-making process and so that they understand I'm there for their best interest. I'm not here to bamboozle you by any means.
mm. It's interesting. I know you don't like brand yourself as somebody who's like necessarily leading a sales revolution or anything,
No.
but at the same time, what you're doing is kind of contrary to what some salespeople will say, or a traditional look at sales that might have worked 50 years ago, right? And one of those concepts too is that yes momentum. So how do you
Yeah.
reconcile, when it comes to yes momentum, people who are high pressured, won't take no for an answer, that kind of thing, versus what you're saying, which is actually feel free to say no, invite them to have
Yeah.
that back door.
Salespeople aren't typically taught to get people to say no. And as soon as they start to introduce that concept, I know a couple of sales leaders right off the top of my head that would completely poo-poo that idea. I'm not interested. All we're going to do is that yes chain. And there's a lot of value to a yes chain. Psychologically speaking, if you get somebody to say yes twice, they're more likely to say yes a third time. The hard part about a high pressure pitch nowadays is people are getting smarter. People are doing more research, they're sticking up for themselves more, and they're not putting up with the junk that they used to put up with 15 years ago. So I think the consumer as a whole is getting smarter. So we need to get smarter about the way they think. How do they process? And the king of this, Amazon. You look at a product site for Amazon, it gives you everything. It gives you a trial period, which makes people want to buy. It tells you there's a limited amount. So it's the scarcity approach that people want to buy. They do a try it before you buy it. So you know you're not getting linked in and you can see if you like it. They tell you the highest price it's been, cross it out and give a lower price. Look at any Amazon selling screen, and they have mastered the art of selling really without selling, without even saying a word. When was the last time you bought something on Amazon, coach?
Yesterday.
Exactly, right? When you go in, they give you the exact ability to say no. You can go away from the page. You can think it's too much, but you're more likely to say yes because of all the psychological triggers they're pulling in that ad.
Well, I know you're a big learner yourself, Jake. So if you're working with a young leader, what would be a book and or it could be a couple or and or a podcast, and of course we know you're starting a podcast and we certainly enjoy our podcast, but we can't use those two, so
Right, exactly.
so let's just so if you have what would it be one or two books, and if you want to add one or two podcasts that you think would really help a young leader.
One thing I think I would recommend is 10x is easier than 2x.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is when we're a sales leader, usually, or even just a leader, not even a sales leader, we're judged by the gains we make. And so we think the bigger the gain, the better. But I think what 10x is easier than 2x tells you is that even a small tweak in routine, something that just gets you a little measurement better today, can cause that 10x in the future. And that it's just as easy to do that as it is to do something that would just 2x you or keep you where you are. And
Mhm.
I think it's got a lot of lessons for leaders in there on perception, how to set the environment, expectations. I know from experience from working with over 10,000 salespeople that they're used to going into a sales meeting and have somebody say, listen, we need to increase by 20% this year. That's a tough statement to make. But if we start doing 10x steps that get us to the 20%, it's a lot easier. The brain kind of shuts off after a while when it comes to self aggrandizing. And Amazon is another great example. Does anybody even remember what Amazon's original logo was? Does anybody even remember what Amazon did originally?
I think it was started as a books, didn't it?
Correct. It was book sales. And look up their old logo. It's terrible.
Yeah.
But it's just we tend to only be able to think in steps and process in steps. And a great book on that was written by Jonah Berger, and I think it's called The Five Barriers to Sales, or The Five Barriers to Sales is in one of his books. He's an amazing social psychologist. Honestly, a good leader could get a boatload out of any of his books.
So this is for leaders, both in the entrepreneurship space, which I know you focus a lot on, and also leaders in the corporate world too,
Yes,
which I know isn't as much your expertise right now, but you've worked a
right.
lot with them in the past. So tell us maybe a salesperson who was successful as an individual contributor, but then got promoted to a sales leader and then now is leading a team. What would you tell him or her to first of all congratulate them for the
Right. Congrats.
now increased responsibility, right? But to also give
Yeah.
them a sign, a warning or a encouragement message to help them through their new role.
I would tell them to read a lot. I would tell them to listen to podcasts a lot. Pick your favorites, ask your friend what their favorites are, but continue to learn the whole time. One of the best companies I've ever worked with had a program for people they were thinking of promoting to leaders. They did an analysis of their leadership style by putting them through all simulations, and then they gave them exercises and things to work on to take care of the stuff they were weak in. Then they promoted them to a leader once they passed. The hard part, and Coach, you and John both know this, the hard part about getting promoted to a leader is just because you're a great salesperson doesn't mean you're going to be a great manager. And managing is hard. It's not easy. There's a reason it's one of the biggest spots in a bookstore. So I would tell people to read, ask around. What are other people reading? There's a million book lists on the internet. Go and find one and just learn constantly. And the second is don't let your ego get in the way.
Boy, Jake, you're right on because I really encourage people to have an intentional personal growth plan, and
Yeah.
that's something when I changed and really started to grow. I fathom, my first varsity basketball position at 25, we won one game and they said no thanks and didn't bring me back. Uh, the fortunate thing is I used it as a motivator, and even after 7 years, I was like 40 games under 500 and ended up over 200 games on the plus side. So a lot of
Amazing.
change, and a lot had to do is just because people ask me all the time, what happened? I became a better leader. When I became a better leader, I attracted better people, and when
No
you get
question. People want to
better
be with you.
people, it's amazing how your team gets better.
Yeah,
It's a
it is.
fascinating thing with that is that that you keep growing. And then the other thing you said that really struck me is that famous put your ego aside because that's hard when
Oh, yeah.
when you get named as a leader. In my case and in a lot of people's cases, you believe you're the know-all, and that
Yeah.
you're going to go. And that when I finally twisted it and said, I got to be the learn-it-all, not the know-it-all.
Yeah.
And when I started to really asking more questions, as you have said, and really got people to feel like they were empowered. And that changed our program immensely, and we had great success because they knew they were doing it, and I was the guide
Yeah.
more than, I was the dictator or the know-it-all. So very interesting. So we
Well,
really appreciate my final question for you. I got to ask you, because I know you do this with your process, but I also want you to help people in the sales, but as a leader, you're always selling, right?
oh my
Is that
God, yes.
you talked about putting that future out. And I know
Yeah.
one of the things you talked about is, how do you evaluate the success of the process of what you're taking people through? What does success, how do you help people see that future? I know there's metrics, but it's got to be a little bit more than that as well.
It's funny you say that, Coach, because one of the things I always say is with neurostrategy, there's no KPI. You can't measure how many times you're referred. You can't measure who's talking about you behind your back. There's no KPIs there. So, one thing I work with leaders to do is I ask them to do reverse engineering. So, future pacing, you want to grow by 15%. So, what are the steps it's going to take to get there in the next 9 months? And let's bring that down to minutia because, as you both know, celebrating milestones is huge, but oftentimes a leader will set milestones too big or they won't celebrate the small stuff. So, what are the milestones? What are the steps to get to those milestones? And how do you celebrate each one? And I think more importantly is not just celebrating the milestone, but how do you tell people their part in the milestone? How much what they did as a contribution contributed to the whole, right? A person, let's keep using Amazon. So a person who sits on the phone for Amazon may not understand how they fit into the big picture. So if every member of your team understands that every phone call contributes to the larger vision and every tiny milestone, hey, you made 20 calls a day, excellent job. So did Mary, Sue, and John. Recognition is big. It's the number one people stay with a company or leave a company. Pay, oddly enough, is number six. So, to answer your question, coach, reverse engineer it, celebrate everything, no matter how small, and recognize people for what they do and how it contributes to the big picture. Because
I
those
love,
people are going to want to work for you.
yeah, I love it. It's funny because I was my last 27 years in coaching. I only had three JV coaches, my right hand person. And I never forget that, when I started to let my ego get out of the way, which wasn't easy early on. And I remember we were in a championship game of a Christmas tournament in Pennsylvania, and it was a very good team. And we were, I don't want to get off on a huge tangent, but
No,
we were
it's okay.
both predominantly man-to-man teams, and
Oh,
they
okay.
had the ball down one with like 15 seconds, and we were in a timeout. And my JV coach said to me, "Go zone. They will not know what to do." And I let my ego get out of the way because that was hard for me because I was a big man-to-man guy.
Right.
And, and we did, and he was absolutely right. And they froze and we won the game. In fact, they didn't even get a shot off. And the reason I share that is because after the game, I was interviewed by a TV station and they asked about that. And I gave all the credit to my JV coach. And you know what? That's when realized I'm finally getting a little bit wiser as a leader, because I was
Yeah.
recognizing for that great idea that helped us win that game. So.
And it really flies in the face of the philosophy a lot of people have that I want to say how much I contributed. I want to tell
Right.
you how much I did. When in
Yes.
reality, showing how much you appreciate what somebody else did
Yeah.
still puts the spotlight on you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
You're
That's a
right.
great point.
That's a good point. Jake, as we wrap up here, tell us a little bit more about this product that you have, Orchestrate, and who can benefit from it in particular, and what it will help them do. You did mention a little bit earlier, but just what it will help them do, if people are more curious about this tool.
yeah, so there's not much Orchestrate won't do for you in the terms of business development. So, if you're just getting started, if you're having trouble selling yourself, Orchestrate will help you create literally the perfect value prop offering. The verbiage will all be exact. It will also help you change your value prop based on the company you're approaching. So if you have their LinkedIn profile, it will basically say, here's your value prop, here's their LinkedIn profile, here's suggested messaging. If you want to role play it, Orchestrate will role play with you and train you how to role play. If you need to negotiate a contract, Orchestrate will not only help you negotiate it, but it will role play with you there too, so you can get better at negotiating. And it will coach you the whole way along. But the biggest success I'm seeing with all of the people that are using it right now is they're using it for one pagers, websites. Some people still use it for sales scripts and how to make sure that their offering is something that's really gonna hit home. It will also help you create three elevator pitches, by the way, 15, 30, and 60-second. So it's to me the ultimate tool for somebody who wants to really up their game in business development, even if they're just getting started.
Hmm.
Jake, I got to dig in one thing. I apologize.
It's
I'm
okay.
overstepping my bounds, but I got to ask you this real quick. Can you give us just a quick little insight? Because people are always, I think, intrigued with the elevator pitch. Can you just talk about the 15-second elevator? Can you give people advice on that?
Yeah, the one thing we never consider with the elevator pitch is we always think we're going to the penthouse. So we have plenty of time to lay it out there, right? But what if you're going to the second floor? So, so you need that 15-second pitch. So the big things are to identify who you are, identify what their problem is. Now you understand this is a back and forth conversation. You talk about how you solve it. And the two big things I always hear missing in an elevator pitch is what's the follow up? And people need to say their name again and their company. Because how many times do you hear a message from somebody and you're walking down the road and you think, that was a great message? What was that guy's name again? You know what I mean? So it's always important to reiterate that at the end so that people know who you are and what you do. But again, coach, I just want to repeat something important is that the elevator pitch should come after the person states their problem and after you've asked them about themselves.
Great
That's when
point.
it's going to be at its highest impact.
Very good point. So Orchestraight will help you do that. And
Yep,
Jake, I know you still do consulting as well, and you
I
coach
do.
business leaders. So how does someone get in touch with you or learn more about this new tool that you have?
The best way to get in touch with me is through LinkedIn. It's literally just LinkedIn / Jake Stahl. There's a lot of Jake Stahls on LinkedIn. If you're watching the video, I'm the only one that looks like me. Uh, if you're not, if you're listening to just the audio portion, then you can go to LinkedIn profile, look for somebody who graduated from Syracuse proudly
That's right.
and has Orchestrate as a company.
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned that, Jake, because that's first how we first hit it off,
Woohoo! Go
and we are,
Orange.
yes, go orange indeed. Jake, we learned a lot today. Neurostrategy, quite a fascinating concept, and I think our leaders who are listening today probably learned a lot as well. So we'd love to hear your feedback and make sure you get in touch with Jake and learn more with the links down in the show notes. Thanks, Jake, for joining us today on the
Thanks for
Limitless
having
Leadership
me.
Lounge.
Thanks, Jake. You were awesome.